In this webinar, we will give an overview of the RSL Piano and Keys syllabus. As those of you who are familiar with our work will recognise that previously we've had a combined piano and keys syllabus. Now these are separated out into two separate specifications, both of which have been carefully managed to ensure that the benchmark skills are correct at each level. We're also going to look at how the exam repertoire supports learning outside the normal one-to-one classroom. So if you're working with other colleagues or working in a wider context or working with students that are playing in bands or preparing towards different qualifications, you'll see how the work you're doing with the Rockschool materials really help students across the board. And we're also going to look at the assessment criteria and the exams process, because there have been some few really great, exciting developments that have gone on over the last few months while we've been in lockdown and indeed beforehand. So as I'm going to deal with the lag that happens with the slides moving on, here we go. So just to flag up that Rockschool is actually one brand of three that sit under the RSL Awards umbrella. It's the brand that sits in the blue box on the left-hand side there. We also have Performing Arts Awards, which are group-based qualifications. Every student gets an individual grade, but is assessed in a group performing street dance, jazz dance, or musical theatre. And there's some great overlap with musical theatre, where you're assessed on your singing, with obviously our vocal syllabus, and those students that are singer-songwriters, and that may be one of the main reasons why they're learning the piano or the keys. We also have on the right-hand side the green box, which is our VQs, or our vocational qualifications. These are qualifications that are taught in the classroom to groups by registered centres. We have about 450 of those across the UK, and a growing number internationally as well. These are qualifications which run from what's known as level 1 to level 3, or indeed 4 and 5. So they're qualifications that suit the sort of the 13 to 18 year olds working at what we might think of as GCSE level or A level, also IGCSE, and of course BTEC. These are essentially alternatives, and very good, strong alternatives to those. And we're in a unique position in that we deliver both graded music exams and vocational qualifications, so in a very strong position to provide that really good link up between what's happening in the classroom and what's happening outside the classroom. The piano and keys, as you can see from the white circles, are 2 of 10 different instrument qualifications that we do across guitar, bass, drums, acoustic guitar, ukulele, music production, vocals, and our popular music theory as well. All of which are highly popular and are being delivered lots and lots all over the place. I think it's 46 countries at our last count. The reason behind the piano and keys syllabus and developing it and moving it on so that we had 2 separate specifications is that we are very mindful of working with students from the very beginning with the view that they want to enjoy their learning. They want to have a high quality learning experience, but it needs to be industry relevant so they can lead on to the creative music industries. So we recognise that there are universal skills that you need to being a musician, and there are universal skills that you need to being a piano player or a keys player, but there are also distinctly separate skills that you need to be a pianist compared to being a keyboard player. The piano syllabus was developed to ensure that students could develop technical and musical skills for working in both solo and ensemble environments. This means that there are 6 pieces to choose from in the book. They fall into 3 categories. There are 2 that are pure solo piano arrangements. These are ones where there's no backing track, you just play what's written and you give it your own really beautiful spin and style, so you can demonstrate your skills as a soloist. There's also melody and accompaniment, where the candidate needs to be able to play the accompaniment and then they play the melody, so it becomes a full solo performance as well. But the difference is this comes with a full backing track, so they'll be playing along with a bassist, guitarist, drummer, and a singer in some instances as well, and indeed a full horns section in other places. This gives them a really a good indication of what it would be like to be a piano player performing on stage with a band. And then, of course, there's the vocal accompaniment, which is also self-explanatory, I think, where they are playing the piano part as part of a band, but they're accompanying a singer, which is obviously another very genuine thing that piano players need to be able to do. The idea being that once they get to sort of grade 8, that they are working at a fairly professional level, actually, and are able to could be put in any musical context and be able to hold their own and know how they needed to respond to the musical and social demands that they're confronted with. The keys syllabus, you'll find, again, is designed for students working in both solo and ensemble environments. But we've added in increasingly sophisticated use of studio and session techniques. So you'll find there are things to do with patch settings, switching, changing the voices of the keyboard instrument halfway through. You'll find that in some at a particular point in the grade, you'll find that the left hand and the right hand need to have different instruments programmed in, so there'll be a particular split on the keyboard that's required. There's also work on using the pitch wheel, modulation wheel, and also chord voicings, and you'll find that the melody and the chords will sit in both the left and the right hand, which is quite distinct and unique for keys players. The idea is that the keys player may be working as a soloist, they may be working in the studio as a musician and as a producer, they may be working as part of a band, or indeed they may be working in the pit as a session musician or a pit musician in a West End show, for example. The tunes in the keys syllabus, there are 3 that are unique and specifically arranged for the keys syllabus. And there are 3 that are shared with the piano as well. So you'll find that there are 3 pieces in the piano syllabus and 3 pieces in the keys syllabus that overlap and map, which means that a student may start off on the piano syllabus, but then decide they want to move across and do the keys syllabus, or they may start off on the keys syllabus and decide they want to move across to the piano syllabus, so they can specialise, but there's also got the ultimate flexibility where they can move between the 2 fairly comfortably, which of course is a fairly good industry skill to have as well. Let's just move on to the next slide. Bear with me for one moment. Here we go. This slide highlights the 2 types of exams that you will find. As many of you will be aware, there's the performance certificate and the graded music exam. Both are equally valid. Both have the same academic rigour. Both have the same level of quality and that you would expect. The difference is with the performance certificate is that you play 5 pieces, 3 of which can be free choice pieces. And the graded music exam, you play 3 pieces, but you also play the technical exercises. These are the scales, the arpeggios and broken chords, the chord voicings, and the technical studies. And then there are also unseen tests. These are sight reading or interpretation and improvisation. You get a choice all the way through from debut to grade 8 as to which one you would like to do. As a teacher, I'd recommend that you give students a chance to do both to see where their skills lie and what they're really interested in. And of course, as they're developing as a musician, being able to switch between the 2, being able to improvise, as well as be able to sight read music is a really important skill. However, for examination purposes, they may find that one they find much more comfortable than the other, in which case obviously we give you the chance to choose between the 2. There's also ear tests, which are the things you would expect to see, what is often known as oral tests. These are where you need to recognise certain chord patterns, certain rhythm patterns, certain major, minor and other scale patterns. And then there are general musicianship questions, which is where the examiner will ask you any question about the piece that the candidate has performed, and they need to be able to sort of understand not just how to play the piece of music and how to play the notes from left to right and from top to bottom, but also how the piece of music has been put together and some of the other techniques and concepts that they were asked to be involved with as they were learning the piece. This slide here gives a really good example of how learning how to be a musician, going through the process of a graded music exam and all the different elements in the book and on the graded music exam, prepare you to be a really good musician and help you to develop your well-rounded skills. If you see on the left-hand side, we have level 1, level 2, level 3. In the UK, the regulatory qualifications framework benchmarks qualifications at a certain level. Internationally and Scotland and Ireland, it's the same, but the levels are numbered slightly differently, but they are essentially the same levels. So our piano syllabus debut grade 1 and grade 2 and grade 3 all sit at level 1. And level 1 is sort of designed for students that are aged 9 to 13. Level 2 is grades 4 and 5. And that's normally for 14 to 16-year-olds and sits kind of at the equivalent to GCSE, IGCSE and our own VQ at level 2. And grades 6, 7 and 8 are level 3, which is the A-level equivalent qualifications or vocational qualifications. So you will see that the level of complexity and sophistication as a musician that are required is really quite sophisticated by that point. Obviously, the performance pieces worth 60% of the exam really help you to prepare, not just as a solo musician, but as I've indicated before, as an ensemble musician. So there's great maps beautifully across to some of our vocational qualifications. So for example, at the level 2 music practitioners qualification, one of the units is about learning how to perform as part of a band, as part of an ensemble. Obviously, these pieces can be used for that purpose. 10% the sight reading and interpretation and improvisation. Composition is something that students often struggle with, even if they're a particularly good musician. 20 years of teaching in the classroom, I'd worked with students that had done a lot of grades. They might be sort of grade 4, 5, 6 on their chosen musical instrument, but you then ask them to write their own version of a piece or recreate a piece themselves, and they'd really struggle. And that's because they hadn't necessarily thought about how the piece of music had been put together in the first place. So going through the exercise of sight reading, where you're recognizing particular patterns on the page, or improvising, where you're given a simple chord chart, backing track, and then you need to create your own melody or your riff, or whilst emulating the rhythms that you can hear that are being played by the bass or the drums, is a really great way into thinking about how a melody is constructed and put together within a chord structure, within a wider structure of a musical piece, and how it interacts with other instruments in the band as well. So it's worth 10% of the exam, so it's a good chunk, but also a very, very useful and important skill to be able to, for students to be able to develop. The technical exercises worth 15% are, as you might expect, designed to develop students' technical facility to play a piece of music. They're tested on being able to play certain types of scales, arpeggios and chords, and so on and so forth. And this is a great opportunity to teach students about music theory. So how a chord is constructed in the way it is, why a major chord sounds the way it does compared to, say, a minor pentatonic or a blues scale, or indeed the relationship between a minor pentatonic and a blues scale, and the fact there are very few notes that are different between the two. The ear tests were 10%. These are really, really good for developing your listening skills, tuning your ear as a musician. So you're in an environment where you can hear if something is out of tune, out of time, in time, whether a musician is another musician or another player is playing a major scale or a minor scale, whether they're playing a chord in first inversion or root position, and how your role interacts with that is very important and very helpful when it comes to being a producer in the studio, or preparing for a GCSE or an IGCSE, where you need to listen to a piece of music in any style, but recognise how that's being used and how it's being put together. And as I talked about earlier, the general musicianship skills, questions, only worth 5%, but 5% can make the difference between a merit and a distinction. This is a great opportunity to help students understand the musical concepts and the understanding of what they're doing. So rather than just being able to play a piece from top to bottom and doing it, with a great sense of technical skill, understanding how they put together is really important. And of course, you may find that looking at a piece of music that's 4 pages long, which for sort of grade 4, 5 upwards may be, that can look like a bit of a daunting task for the student. But if you're breaking it down so they can see where the first section that's 8 bars long is repeated a little bit later on, or a particular riff or melodic pattern is played somewhere and then repeated and built in elsewhere, maybe with some subtle variations, you'll find that suddenly the piece of music becomes less like a wash of notes and more like a kind of relatively organised logical pattern which they can then follow, and really helps them understand how to write their own music as well as to play the music they've got in front of them, and of course to emulate their own heroes, which is a significant motivation for a lot of students, particularly if that hero happens to be you as their teacher. We're now going to look at the Beauty and the Beast, which is from the debut piano syllabus. This is a melody and accompaniment arrangement, and on the left-hand side you can see the free choice piece guidelines. Now, I mentioned these earlier, and the free choice piece can be selected from any genre. So you may find that you've got students that have been working towards a particular grade or particularly inspired by playing one particular piece of music in a style. They can use that in their exam as long as you have referred to the guidelines that are on the left-hand side of this screen here, and you can see, you can make sure that it meets the majority of the criteria. Now, we do have an email address that you can check, where the piece will cut the mustard, so to speak. But you will also find, as you go through the syllabus, that obviously the pieces have been matched against these same criteria. Now, you won't find that every piece covers all the criteria on the left-hand side, but you will find that between them they cover all of those, and they'll certainly cover off quite a few. So in this example, Beauty and the Beast, it's a relatively straightforward key, it's a slow tempo, it's a relatively short piece, 40 seconds to a minute 20. The time signatures are really quite straightforward, as are the rhythmic values. Very few dynamics to worry about, very little articulation to worry about at this stage. And the melody is quite straightforward, designed for relatively small hands with not too many movement, so that students who are just starting out can really get to grips with this piece of music. Now, as we said, this is for students that haven't been learning very long, and they're probably going to be around 8 or 9 years old. Although, of course, every child learns at a different level. So some people may begin their musical journey, so to speak, being able to play at a higher level with more prior learning. Others may take longer to go through a debut piece. So obviously you could be any age and have any number of experience and start at any grade and work through at your own pace, and that's really the joy of these graded music exams. So let's just have a listen to Beauty and the Beast and notice the quality of the recording of the backing track.
Beauty and the Beast. 1, 2, 3, 4.
We were very keen when we did these recordings to ensure that they could be as high quality as possible. So we worked with some really top class session musicians and spared no expense when it came to the studios that we used. So some of these pieces were recorded at places like Abbey Road Studios to make sure that from day one, from the very first time students are engaged with Rockschool, they get to see the quality of musicianship that they will be working with as they work into our multi-billion-pound industry that we're all a wonderful part of. You can also see that these pieces have been very specially arranged to sit at particular levels. So Beauty and the Beast obviously is a relatively straightforward melody anyway, but things like in bar 8 where you have the G chord, that's just a straight G chord rather than it being written as a G sus chord, which I think is what's in the original. So there are tweaks and things that are done to the arrangements to make sure that they sit at the right level. So when you're trying to work out what pieces to choose for people working at different levels, obviously the work has been done for you. So hopefully this is really valuable and really helpful. Just to note at the bottom, you can see while we've been talking about a piano piece, at the bottom the free choice piece guidelines for the keyboard are sitting there as well. So you can see that singles patch settings, a basic variety of sounds and basic layering of sounds as well. So nothing too complicated. And you'll find that when they're playing on the keyboard and when they're playing on the piano, there won't be significant differences at this stage. Let's now move on to the grade 4. So we've jumped up now from the very beginning of level 1 to the beginning of level 2 now. So this is pieces that might ordinarily be played by sort of 14-year-olds, but certainly students that are at the level of ability, which means they can jump into GCSE, IGCSE, and VQ style performances. This is Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. You can see on the right hand side that it's got a different level of sophistication, but again, nothing enormously complicated, a relatively straightforward key signature. The chord changes are slightly quicker. The tempo hasn't changed significantly. The piece has got longer because there are more technical demands that need to be covered. But you will find that in some of the pieces and some of the books you'll have different time signatures, so more complex 6/8, 9/8, 12/8 and so on. So that already indicates that there are differences and subtleties and understanding of rhythm that need to be involved with. There's also dynamics that are increasingly in there, as are articulation and phrasing. And also this is in split common time, which is 2/2 or 4/4, but counted in twos. And notice as well as we listen to it how there's the shift of the right hand down an octave. So being able to read that terminology where it says 8 VE in the middle of the system. Let's have a listen to Goodbye Yellow Brick Road.
Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. 1, 2.
There we go. It's a lovely arrangement, lots of things to get your teeth into, and you can hear in the recording there, the full audio track, some of the subtleties in the articulation where the right hand needs to be able to bring out the melody against some of the internal harmonizations. For example, the second bar of section A, or bar 6, just a lick that is very characteristic of Elton John. Let's now look at grade 6. So in a moment you're going to see Africa by Toto come up on the screen, and you can see on the left hand side that the tempo range is now really quite broad. So it could be very slow at 50 beats per minute, or indeed very, very quick at 200 beats a minute. And the idea is there that you can play at a range of different speeds. But when you're playing slowly, there are particular sort of subtleties and intricacies rhythmically that you need to be engaged with. While at 200 beats per minute, it's really about being able to have the technical facility to play at such a fast tempo. You can see that on the page there's an awful lot more going on here. There's a more complicated key signature and a lot more rhythmic intricacy going on. So let's have a listen to it, and then I'm going to talk through a couple of segments for you.
Africa. 1, 2, 3, 4.
on the face of it, I think when you see that written down for the first time, it can look like quite a daunting lot of things to be able to do and to be able to cope with. And certainly, if like me, you've been a classically trained pianist, I moved across to sort of contemporary music, contemporary pop, jazz, and so on at the age of about 14. But certainly, my learning started out by looking at a piece of music and playing the notes on the page, and that was my starting point. Whereas and that can look quite daunting, particularly as we do not shy away from bringing in syncopation at a fairly early stage, because of course in pop music syncopation is part of the style, particularly when it comes to melodies which are very rarely on the beat. And we haven't sort of adjusted the melodies to be less syncopated in a number of cases, and that's really because the natural way of learning music, we find, particularly for the YouTube generation, is the natural way of kind of learning how to speak, in that you will hear the stuff, you'll learn how to speak the stuff, and then later on you learn how to read it and indeed to write it down. So we take a very similar philosophy in our learning and advocate for that approach with our teaching. So with a piece like Toto, if you listen to the full audio, and you learn how to play what you can hear, you'll find you're going to get a really nice genuine experience, and then you will see that what you hear is decoded on the page in front of you. So you can so it's essentially a bit of a memory aid, which of course is how staff notation first came about in about the 12th century anyway. So we've kind of maintained a bit of integrity in doing that, and we found that that's a really good, really engaging way for students to learn. Of course, what you do need to do is make sure that they're listening to the audio that comes with the book, and that they're trying to emulate it as accurately as possible in order to satisfy the assessment criteria. While there is room for a bit of interpretation and a bit of movement, you need to stay as faithful to the notation on the page as you possibly can. Let's now look at grade 8. So this is the end credits from ET. Now, all the arrangements up to this stage have been melody and accompaniment. This is a solo piano arrangement. So you'll hear that it's obviously just a piano playing. And look on the left-hand side. You'll find that as grade 6 is the beginning of the level 3 qualifications, this is the grade 8, so the end of the level 3 qualifications and the top end of the qualification suite. So this is the most sophisticated stuff that the students need to be able to play. And you should find that in the pre-choice guidelines on the left-hand side, that a lot of that is also spoken about at grade 6, but really by grade 8. The name of the game is you should be able to cope with pretty much anything that's been put in front of you in terms of the combination of rhythms, in terms of the key signatures, time signatures, tempos, and indeed the length of the pieces. Now, if you know the end credits from ET, you'll know that it goes through a number of changes. So while the first section looks as it does and sounds as it does, which we'll hear in a minute, as we go through, it moves into a very different mood and very different techniques required. So as a high quality, well trained, well drilled pianist and musician, you need to be able to cope with changes of styles over really quite a short period of time. How that's replicated with the keyboard syllabus is that you will find that patch settings will be quite complicated. You can see at the bottom multiple layers and splits and switching to alternative settings in performance. So you'll find that after 8 bars or 10 bars or 12 bars, as well as being able to play the music in front of them, the musician will be able to use the keyboard well enough to be able to switch to a different set of settings and recordings, so the whole sound, the whole timbre, the whole tone quality of the instrument and their role in the group changes. And you can see that there's things like applying effects, lots of pitch wheel and modulation, and there's going to give you an example of that in a minute or two. But let's just listen to the John Williams end credits. And notice particularly the cross rhythm between the right hand triplet arpeggios and the left hand quaver broken chords.
ET end credits.
Okay, and that also hopefully gives you a great representation of the broad range of styles that are covered. So we're not talking about pop music, we've also got jazz, and we've got some classical and film musical theatre styles written into the specifications. And those of you that are in the ukulele webinar last week will have been introduced to Chick Corea's Spain, which is also one of the pieces in the grade 8 piano and keys syllabus. Indeed, Bohemian Rhapsody in the ukulele syllabus is also in the piano and keys syllabus. So there's a great way of cutting across and having people playing the same pieces of music outside the classroom, and they're not necessarily working towards a grade at that particular point, but they can work on playing it with a live band. Now I'm going to move across and introduce you to, or give a bit of a demonstration of replay. And I'm just going to have to, I think we discovered here. Can I just have a quick thing in the chat here? Can you see my screen? Because yesterday I think I needed to share my screen differently. So can I just check that people can see what's on the screen in front of me there? You should be able to see replay and the number of book covers. Excellent. Good. Hopefully this will work beautifully. So when you get a digital version of our books, which are available from our store, you also get Replay, which is our cloud-based interactive rehearsal tool, which I'm sure a number of you are familiar with. You can also get it with the hard copy books as well. You just need to speak to us in order to do that. And they get added to your own profile. Yeah, as you can see the icon here, we can download the PDF, and let's just have a listen to what happens. So you basically play along either with the audio or the full audio or the backing track.
Radioactive. 1, 2, 3, 4.
So just showing you the first two sections there. This is a grade 2 keys piece, and you can see all the way through the right hand isn't used. This is all about being able to help students to use their left hand in time with everything else that's going on. And you can see in the second bar of section B here the use of the pitch wheel and the assessment how well and how accurately they use that. There are a couple of features which I'm going to show you now in Replay which can really help the beginner student. If you go to the keyboard icon at the bottom of the screen here, it brings up a keyboard, and it will play the notes along as you are learning how to play the piece. So if I just show you the beginning of section B, click on there, we can play from there. Which is lovely. We can also go to the circuit wheel here, the settings wheel, and we can adjust the track appearance, and we can take out the right hand part, so we've just got the left hand part. We could have the chords over the top if you think that's going to be valuable to help them contextualize what they're doing. You can also use a horizontal view, so that makes it a lot more straightforward, and there's less sort of getting in the way of the students being able to look at what they need to be able to do. So let's get back to the beginning.
Radioactive. 1, 2, 3, 4.
You could even, if you wanted, get to the point where there's no notation involved at all, and you can just have the chord chart written all the way through, which could be a great feature if you've got students that are working in a band or are just purely at this stage learning by ear. Let's now have a look at let's jump up now a grade or two to keys grade 5. I'm going to show you Fireflies. Again, let me know if this doesn't come up. Should now be able to see that.
Fireflies. 1, 2, 3, 4.
And you can see there in this melody and accompaniment arrangement how the musician's role changes. So you've got this complicated stuff at the beginning, then change voices, patch 2 at section B, simple chords but different chord voicings, and then patch 3, a repeat of section A, but the keyboard player has now got a different role, so a new patch and a different rhythm. This opening section here looks relatively frightening if you just listen to it and you're trying to work out how to play that straight away. So there are a few little tips and tricks. First of all, if I go to this circle down here, you can see that we can loop a section and we can just play this over and over again. So you can just get to grips with it. You can also slow the tempo down. Now here's a tip for you. If you go on the recordings here, you can choose between the performance, the backing track, or a synthetic, which is a much more compressed MP3 version, or it's just a MIDI file, which if you are dealing with a slightly less good Wi-Fi connection or operating on 4G or 5G, for example, you may find this particularly helpful. And here you can see the BPM, or the tempo. You can slow it right down, so you can actually gradually get to grips with just playing this opening pattern. And you could also, if you go to the settings here, you can play with the counting, and let's extend it. So we're going to now try do the first 2 bars. And so on and so forth. And you can see that this first bar here is the same as this bar here, or indeed these first 2 bars are the same as the first 2 bars of letter A. So by spending some time learning how to play the first 2 bars, you're learning how to play more of the piece than just that section. So that's a really quite a nice feature. Now let's have a look at a grade 8 piano piece. I think we're going to look at now. Let's have a look. Yeah, we're going to look at Birdland. This is another example of one of the grade 8 pieces, and again we've had a look at the end credits from E.T. We know that Chick Corea's Spain is in there. Here's another style, a really great jazz fusion piece, Birdland Weather Report. Let's have a quick listen.
Birdland. 1, 2, 3, 4.
So let's just have a look at this section here, one of the iconic anthemic riff patterns that appears in Birdland. If I just click from here and then put the loop on for this section here, just crossing over into E, you can see that there's a lot of synchronization between the left and the right hand, but there's some technical skill involved, particularly with the chord changes in the right hand and then the left hand playing underneath. So there are some nice features here. If you look at the sound here, if I go to the synthetic version, you can see that you can adjust the levels for both the metronome click and the overall track, and then the piano parts as well. So I can put a metronome click on. I could then mute the right hand part, which means that you can have the left hand part playing and you can just practice playing the right hand over the top. Or indeed you can have it playing, but maybe you could just slowly fade it out as you get more and more confident about playing it. So there's lots of really useful tools there, which means whichever your preferred learning style is, your preferred teaching style is, you can find that the replay should be able to really support you very, very nicely. I mentioned earlier that you can get a hold of Replay with the digital book by going to our online store. Also, at the end of this webinar, we're going to send you a link to a survey, which would be great if you could complete for us, which will give us a bit of feedback on this webinar, but also information on any other webinars you'd like us to run, and we can look at facilitating those. And on completion of that, you will get a unique code of 15% discount, which you can use at musicroom.com. So you can get 15% discount on any hard copy books that you purchase by using that code, which is a great thing that Hal Leonard have put in place for us. So yeah, we're really, really pleased about that. You can see there a list of what's in the book. When you get the book from us, you get all 6 tracks, which has got download links to the full audio and backing tracks. You also get fact files, which are great for getting some background information as to how the song was put together, and other interesting bits and pieces about the band, their motivation for writing the piece, and indeed that also signposts people to wider listening, so that candidates can get to know not just that piece, but pieces in a similar style or pieces in a completely different style, but written by the same band. The performance notes are great. I think in other exam syllabuses they're referred to as walkthroughs. These are essentially the same thing. They give you guidance on things to work on in each track, both from a teaching point of view and from a student's point of view, which is great for inside and outside the lesson. You also get all the technical exercises, all the scales, arpeggios, chord voicings of technical studies, all the examples of the sight reading, interpretation and improvisation, and the ear tests, and examples of the sorts of questions you might be asked in the general musicianship questions. Also, it's great that in there you get the mark scheme and the piano notation explained. So you can see that in the grade 5 example and the grade 8 example, there were things like there were glissandi, there were pitch bends, and so on and so forth. So those are explained in the book as well, so you don't have to. Have a little look at the technical skills, which we referred to earlier. So this is worth 15% of the final mark. Just give you some examples of the sorts of things you're asked to do. Group A is scales. Group B is arpeggios and broken chords. Group C is about the chords, and this is what I want to show you because I think it's particularly interesting. In grade 1, the candidate is simply given an example and asked to play not just major and minor. They are triads, but these are diminished and augmented triads, as you can see in root position, first inversion and second inversion. And you also get an audio example. By the time you move up to grade 3, I'll just got a question in the chat window here. Great. The Grade 3, we've now moved on, not just being able to play the chords, obviously, in time, but you now need to be able to play them at a particular tempo, and you might be asked to play a harmonised scale in sevenths, which is this example here with the root in the bass. The other example is with the root in, the third in the bass. Let's have a quick listen. So you can see that you're given I think that's 70 beats per minute at grade 3. And then by the time you move up to grade 5, again, you're given a backing track, you're given a metronome click with the book, and I think this is at 90 beats per minute. Here's grade 5, where we moved on from diminished and augmented triads at grade 1, then gone on to harmonised sevenths at a particular tempo at grade 3. By the time we get to grade 5, great chords, C minor 11, so really crunchy, sort of jazzy chords that are being involved now. And then by the time you get to level 3, you're given what's called a technical study. Now these are in particular styles, and you choose the style that you want to use. And this is because you're beginning to specialise between being a sort of a rock musician or a jazz musician or a sort of musical theatre musician, if you like, as 3 examples. And at this stage, not only do you need to be able to play the chords and voice them properly, but you need to be able to play them at a certain tempo and with a certain rhythm, and then you need to have independence in your left hand. In this case, because it's jazz, it's chord comping, and then there's a soloing that comes in later on as well, and then there's walking bass. Just have a quick listen. There we go. And that sort of style there, where you've got a written out solo that you need to be able to play with some really nice intricate moments, is a lovely introduction to pieces like These Are the Days, Jamie Cullum, which is from the grade 8 syllabus, where you've got Jamie Cullum's written out solo that you play along to. Let's now have a look at the sight reading and improvisation and interpretation section. We'll just have a brief look at that when the screen eventually decides to move on. There we go, just having a little moment. Let's have a little look. In a moment we're going to see a screen which has got the examples of grade 1 sight reading and grade 8 sight reading, so you can see the difference between the two, and also the grade 1 improvisation and grade 8 improvisation examples. You can see on the top left here, the grade 1 sight reading example, the left hand and the right hand are generally independent. They're not doing anything too complicated. And the left hand essentially imitates the right hand. Now bear in mind these are unseen tests, so what you've got in the book are just examples of what you might be asked to do. One of the things the candidate's assessed on is their speed of response, particularly at the higher levels. Here we go. Lovely, nice, very delicate little melody. And let's now have a listen to the difference between the grade 1 improvisation example and the grade 8 improvisation example. You can see in the examples here, which again are just examples, you may be asked to do anything, you can see some of the differences: the tempo, the key signature, and of course the speed of the chord changes and the complexity of the chords. In grade 1, simple F, B flat, C and B flat, so you're talking about chords 1, 4 and 5 with 1 bar changes. Grade 8, we're talking about B flat minor 9, F minor 7, E flat minor 11, F minor 7 and a G flat, A flat slash chord. So somewhat more complicated. Let's just have a listen to the backing track that you're given by the examiner in the exam to improvise over. And obviously that's in a reggae style, so hopefully the candidate will be able to recognise the reggae style and kind of emulate that in their own performance. Do candidates sight read to track in the exam? Yes, they do. That's one question I've just been asked. So again, carefully chosen to demonstrate that the style may be the same, but it's the level of complexity within that style that we're looking at, which should lead us on quite nicely to the next slide, where I'm going to talk briefly about the assessment criteria and the digital mark sheet. And again, we're just waiting for the slides to catch up. Here we go. Yeah. So those of you that work with Rockschool for a while will be aware that obviously we assess things very, very carefully and very clearly. And what we have done is adjusted things so across all the graded exam syllabuses, they now look exactly the same in terms of the assessment criteria and learning outcomes. We haven't changed what candidates need to be able to do. We've just presented it in a much more clear way. So every exam is assessed against 3 learning outcomes, which you can see on the left-hand side: performing music in pop styles, demonstrating technical ability, and being able to demonstrate musical understanding through a range of set tests. And each of those are assessed in different sections of the exam. And then we have assessment criteria for our command of instrument, sync or pulse, accuracy and understanding, and style and expression. All 4 of those are assessed through the performance pieces. So we're looking at how well the candidate is able to produce the sound on their instrument, how well they're able to stay in time with themselves and with the backing track, and their accuracy and understanding. So their ability to read and interpret the written notation and the music they can hear in the background. Interpreting the written part with equivalent skills demonstrated is a very key phrase there. Secure understanding of musical structure evidenced through transitions of phrases, bars and sections. And you can see there's a link across to the general musicianship questions there as well. And then the style and expression. This is how well the candidate is able to go into the room and express and communicate their musicality to the examiner through the pieces they play. How that is then expressed out the other side is here. We've got an example of the digital mark sheet that every candidate has now been given since May. The bands of assessment are, as you might expect, unclassified, pass, merit and distinction. And then for each assessment criteria, you're given a mark out of 20, which the examiner makes a note of. They then know whether that's a pass, a merit or a distinction from each of the assessment criteria, and they write that down on the digital mark sheet, which you can see on the right hand side here. And then you're given an overall mark for each piece, each technical exercise and the unseen tests, which means you can see whether you've got your mark out of 20, and you can see which criteria hit the pass, the merit or distinction in each case, which gives you a really good indication of where your strengths were and what else you need to develop. This is backed up by a brief bit of written feedback from the examiner written in the box here, where they are focusing on what went well and suggested improvements. And for this example, this candidate absolutely nailed their first piece, did pretty well in their second piece. Their third piece was pretty locked down as well. Unfortunately, possibly they need to spend a little bit more time on their technical exercises and their unseen tests, because they didn't really have a particularly good time there. Maybe they suffered from exam nerves, or they simply hadn't really focused on that as much as they might have done in their exam. And as it happens, the next webinar in the series is using the technical skills to help develop the performance pieces, because I think it can be difficult to motivate students to play to practice their chords and their scales and their technical exercises. So being able to see how the performance pieces can support that learning can create a much more engaging environment for some, which may indeed deal with some of the issues that this candidate suffered from here. Just a quick note on the exams. As I've indicated, we run full graded exams and the performance certificate. And at the moment, it's also possible to do a face-to-face exam or a live video exam or a video submission. And within the video submission, you can either do a performance certificate or a graded certificate. And I'm just going to throw over to Connor now, if that's okay, just to explain about the live video exams and the video submissions, because this is particularly relevant for a number of our international colleagues. Thanks, Connor.
Thank you, Dan. Good morning or good afternoon. Good to everybody. We have two different types of video exam available internationally and as well in the UK. As Dan mentioned, we have the pre-recorded video exams, which are great for candidates who might be a bit nervous in a live exam because they get to have as many goes as they like before they submit that. That would be a performance certificate or a graded certificate. But we also offer now live video streaming exams where you will be examined as exactly the same as you would in a face-to-face exam, except we are honouring social distancing and making sure that everybody's safe in the process as well. So that would be a UK examiner examining your candidates, going through all of the elements that Dan has described today in exactly the same way, and awarding your candidates the qualification at the end of it all for whatever instrument or grade they choose to do. This is also available for the PAA elements of musical theatre, street dance, and jazz dance too. One of the great things about that is if you are on the other side of the world, so Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, we fit to your schedule. So if you want to have an exam at 7 a.m. in Jakarta, we have to go and wake up an examiner to make sure that they're happy to do that for you. But they will do, of course, because they're very keen to support you as best as they can. Those are going to be available for candidates for as long as we can foresee into the future. We think it is the future, essentially, of examinations going forward. So jump on board the bandwagon as quickly as you can. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Connor. It's also worth bearing in mind for those of you in the UK, the recent government guidance that was published last week, which has raised some questions about when instrumental teachers may be allowed to go back into schools, or indeed how music is going to be delivered in schools. The live video exam is a great option. If you're teaching online, obviously you can continue working with students to create their video submissions through that method, but we can also run live video exams for candidates in schools, where a school may prefer to set up a live video link rather than having one of our examiners come onto the school site. Particularly useful if you've got a handful of students, sort of 5 or 6, rather than the 14 or 15 we would ordinarily expect for us to send an examiner to your school. The other thing I'm going to touch on now is we often get asked questions as to why you would bother doing an exam, because if you've got the pieces and you're engaged and you're really enjoying playing them and you're thinking, well, actually the exam is just like another level of nervousness or something that students are worried about. Well, I think the response to that is that it's an internationally recognised qualification which carries UCAS points at grade 6 to 8. So a grade 6 pass is 8 UCAS points, and a grade 8 distinction is 35 UCAS points, which is roughly equivalent to a grade C at A level. So has great currency across the world, depending on what you want to use it for. And of course, schools can use it for their whole school performance measures, their Progress 8 measures as well. If you want more information about that, you can email us and we happily support. And the other really simple thing, of course, is there are a lot of people involved in supporting students through learning a musical instrument, parent, teacher, and the student themselves. And this is a valuable reward for the investment of energy, time, and money. And I can speak from personal experience there, as I've got a couple of girls that are currently working through 3 different exams between them, and there's quite a lot of work involved by quite a lot of people to keep them working towards that, particularly during these times as well, as everything has moved online. The other thing that we do to support students and teachers is we realise that that when you're starting out working towards your debut piano exam, there's a certain amount of learning that needs to go on beforehand. And I touched on this idea of bringing syncopation in quite early. So we brought out piano method books. These aren't exams, but at the end of each book, you get a certificate, or the student gets a certificate to show they've completed the book. And by the time you're halfway through book 2 of the piano method, you're kind of knocking on the door of being ready to do your debut piano exam. There's introduction to the basics of theory, notation, and indeed just the general basics of playing the piano on there. It's arranged into different topics, and at the end of each topic, you get a sticker. Each topic contains parts for the student to play, which come with both downloadable audio but also a teacher part to play along. So you've got that flexibility in how you want to approach it, both in the classroom and outside the classroom. These books are available in hard copy format only, because we recognise that at this age, you're talking about sort of 5, 6, 7-year-olds generally, is what we would regard as the target audience, I suppose. They like having a hard copy book, a physical book they can hold on to and own. And obviously with the stickers and the certificates, that makes a lot more sense having those as physical versions rather than digital. Also, as you're looking to engage with Rockschool and the piano and keys exams, please do check out our news page, which not only has information about that are instrument specific, but it's also got quick tips about choosing free choice pieces. It's got advice from examiners how to recover from mistakes during your exam, how to prepare for different parts of the exam, external experts around dealing with performance, nerves and anxiety. And there's also loads of Rockschool stories on there, so different people that are doing different things as professional musicians and how they've engaged with Rockschool during their career, which I think are great inspirational pieces for your students. On the YouTube channel, you'll find there's all sorts of introductory videos, tutorials, walkthroughs, and guidance that you can look at as well, which is really helpful. And it's also worth bearing in mind that if you sign up to our Teach Today program via our teacher registry, you'll end up with a profile on our teacher registry, which is fully searchable for anybody looking for a piano teacher. But you will also get access to the piano method books and debut piano in digital copy for free. And you'll also get schemes of work and principles of learning, which will guide you through the process of teaching those if you feel that would be beneficial. That's through our Teach Today program, and we'll be sending information about that together with the survey after this webinar. And as you can see here, the survey, as I mentioned, will give you a 15% discount code once you've completed it, and this is going to give us feedback on this webinar and information on other training that you'd like to receive from us. If you've got any other questions or want to check anything out, please go to our website. If you're in the UK, you can email business@rslawards.com. We're international@rslawards.com. And please, as well as the Teaching Technical Skills Through Performing webinar, which are on the Tuesday the 4th of August and then repeated on Wednesday the 5th of August. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock and again at 4:30, we've got an Introduction to Performing Arts Awards, specifically focused on musical theatre. So you can see how the musical theatre exams could be a really great thing for your institution or some of your students or some of the schools you're working in to get engaged with. So please do come along to that one, or indeed refer your colleagues to attend as well. Thank you very much. That is everything from us. I think I'm going to leave this screen up now, and then I'm going to open the floor and see if there are any questions that people have. Thanks very much.